Hey guys, this is Dylan and Charlie from Kronos. It's not really a startup anymore, probably a couple years into it. They make a very cool app that helps you track your daily activities, so you can find out how you spend your time, how healthy you are, and then allow you to make better decisions on how you want to spend your time and how to improve your lifestyle. So both very smart guys. They could have chosen a much more stable career path given their backgrounds or education. But they chose to do this, and they've done very well so far. So they're based right here in San Francisco in the Mission District. So I'm just going to tell you their story, and then as you feel free, just ask any questions. Okay?
Cool. All right, I guess I can do my background starting way back and kind of up till now. So grew up in the Northeast, grew up kind of Ithaca, New York, New Haven, Connecticut, that kind of area. Came out to Stanford for undergrad, majored in mechanical engineering, spent some summers working on startups, kind of more mechanical engineering work, so working on things like integrating sensors into hardware devices and working on some like early step counters and some of the software around that. After I graduated, it kind of got in my head that I really liked engineering, I liked building stuff, but I also kind of wanted to get a sense of like what the business side of a startup was. I kind of had this fear that if I kept on working for startups as an engineer, then I wouldn't ever really be able to kind of guide the vision. So I went and worked as a business consultant for a couple of years in New York, came back to Stanford for grad school, and actually met Charlie as a grad student. And kind of came back very much with the intention of wanting to start a company, wanting to build something, didn't quite have the team, didn't quite have the idea, was trying to figure that out, and kind of used grad school as a long time to pull all those things together, and then really by the time we were finished, ready to go and launch it.
Cool. My name's Charlie. I grew up down in Menlo Park, Palo Alto area. When I was in high school, I was really into music. I went to college thinking I'd work in the music industry and spent a while sort of managing bands and doing something totally different. Realized doing that for a little bit, I didn't really like it that much. Came out here during college, worked for Pandora, the online radio station, or online radio service, when I was pretty early on. So got to do some cool stuff with them for a couple of years during college. Realized what I liked most about it was sort of the tech side of it. So then when I graduated, worked at Google for 2 years on the calendar team, doing some product development stuff with them. And then went to grad school, met Dylan, and similarly sort of came to grad school, had this idea of, I want to start a company, I want to build something. I don't necessarily want to go work for a larger company. And the reason behind that was this idea of, you can go somewhere, you can go to Google, you can go to Microsoft, you can go to Facebook, and you can do good work there, but ultimately, unless you're sort of one of the lead guys or early on there, realistically, sort of the level of impact you can have, at least for me, what I found is not going to really move the needle. Like if I did a great job at work for a day or a week or a year, Google's stock price is doing exactly the same, and Google to anyone else basically looks the same way it's going to look, regardless of sort of how well I do. Whereas a startup, it's sort of, I found this chance, this opportunity to really build something that will sort of have my fingerprint and Dylan's fingerprint on it, and this ability to actually really create change that we can see, even if we don't have 100 million users, it still does create that change on a smaller scale. That's sort of level of ownership of the product was really compelling to me.
Yeah, and so in terms of the actual idea, both of us have been thinking about things related to this intersection of digital and physical, so we're both really excited about this idea of, we basically have sensors on our body 24/7 in the form of these smartphones. And so the way that we used to work with our phones was you would go in, you would type stuff on the screen, and that's the only way you'd input stuff. It was basically taking everything we had done on desktops and trying to do it just on a smaller screen, which when you think about it is kind of crazy, because we're also keeping track of where you are 24/7, we're keeping track of how you're moving, we're keeping track of what the light is around you, what the sound is around you, all these other factors, and all that data is kind of just getting thrown away right now. So we said, it's got to be a different way that we're going to use these phones and these devices in the future, and it's not going to be about me manually inputting content, it's going to be about kind of passively collecting information about you. You just go about your day-to-day life, we understand where you are, what you're doing, and from that we'll be able to surface the right information at the right time and help you make better decisions. So that was kind of the technology backdrop, and then the problem that we got was just that we felt really, really busy in our own lives, so we would often get to the end of the week, get to Friday, feel like we've been running around doing a lot, and then had this sinking sensation of where did that time actually go? Where did this week go? Where did we actually spend our hours? Did we spend them sleeping, exercising, working? Where's all that time been? And I think we found that if you looked over the course of a month or a year or even longer periods of time, kind of these periods of time that are unaccounted for kind of compound on each other. And you start to realize that even if I have goals to be healthier or to sleep more, things like that, it's sometimes hard to track that. It's hard to track, am I sleeping more this month versus last month? Am I spending more time working this month versus last month? And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to take all this new technology that lets you track what you're doing 24/7 and apply that to that problem. So you could basically understand how your life plays out and then ultimately have recommendations, have insights that can say things like, hey, it looks like you haven't been to the gym for 2 weeks, why don't you go to the gym? Or it looks like you hadn't gone to bed before 1 a.m., it's getting to be 12:30, you better go to bed soon. Or you're still at the office, it's 5 p.m., or still at school, it's 5 p.m. You said you want to hang out with this particular friend, why don't you make sure you leave soon and go and do that? And so that's kind of what the app does today. It's iOS, we actually just released an Android version, hopefully within the next week and a half. And basically what it does is it just runs in the background in your phone. We pull in as much data as we possibly can from how you're moving, to where you are, to things like calendar and wearables, and bundle them all together, try to get a clear understanding of what you as the user are doing, and then we kind of run analytics on top of it and try to figure out what are some cool patterns about your behavior, where are the places you're spending your most time, what are some ideas you have around goals you have, for example, going to the gym or going to bed early, and try to bundle that all together and serve it back to you as something that actually provides you recommendations and insights that can help you, live your life better and make better decisions in the moment. So it's kind of like a lofty goal with a lot of different components, but I think the exciting thing for us is that it's been something that started with a problem that we, initially felt ourselves, and have been able to get it out there and see that other people feel the same way about this issue, and have been able to kind of guide the product to meet the demands of the users that have been testing it and using it.
I think something that's been important too is sort of taking a step back beyond what we're directly building is when you guys think about what sort of you want your career to be or what you want to work on, or things you want to build. The number one thing I would say is you should probably, especially if you want to go the startup route, make sure you're investing time in something that it's not just I want to do this if it's successful, because then the target should not be just to do something in the hopes and imagine that will be successful, but you're actually solving a problem that you feel, or you care about the problem enough because you're going to be putting so much work and time and energy into it that more than likely, a startup you have is going to fail. You're going to have to sort of get back up from that and reassess, but your entire sort of motivation for it is sort of the imagined success at the end of the road. Chances are you're not going to get there. So you need to be aiming for that, but you also need to sort of have some inherent value. Get out of working on an idea that's meaningful to you, so that when it's 2 in the morning, you've been working for 14 hours, you're not just imagining, geez, I wish I was done with this and I wish I could just get this out and be, over it. You're actually sort of passionate about the goal that you're going for, and trying to make sure that you're building something that not only you imagine other people will care about, but you also intrinsically care a lot about.
Yeah, and so kind of in terms of where we are, the company's been around now for about 2 years. We just going raw and kind of just now about 6-7 people, kind of depending on how you count. And so we've kind of gone through the whole fundraising process, the whole product launch process, kind of all the different parts of a startup. Fundraising process is not the most fun in the world. I mean, you can go into more detail about how that works and what that is, but it's one of those things where when you do a startup, you really it's your own business, and you can kind of set the vision and all that stuff, but then there's a certain period where you kind of need to win over someone else, and that's usually an investor. And so there's this whole process of almost separating yourself from the product development work for a while and spending time and trying to reach out to a bunch of people. And there's different stages you can reach out to people. So sometimes there's these huge funds that invest in kind of bigger companies, and sometimes there's smaller ones that invest in earlier stage companies, and sometimes it's just an individual. And so trying to find the right place in there, and then trying to find the right person that is excited about your idea too, and excited about you as a team. So it's a lot of meetings, a lot of presenting, and a lot of kind of trying to find the right fit. Which I think can be frustrating sometimes, because sometimes all you want to do is, go and work on the product. But it's kind of a necessity, especially if you're doing a startup like ours, where you're not making money right out of the gate by selling a service or selling a subscription or doing something like that. So, and happy to talk about any you guys are most interested in, whether it's the technology stuff or the team or startups in general, or kind of any particular questions related to startups.
Can you talk more about fundraising? How do you start finding investors?
Yeah, basically the network is everything. So at the end of the day, you know who the people are who you want to talk to a certain degree. There's some element of finding, again, what that right tier is. So for us, I think we actually made the mistake of initially talking to some of the larger venture capital firms that typically don't invest at a seed stage, who typically don't invest when the company's really early on. And I think what they'll do is they'll often meet with you, but the meetings that you'll get will be something where, you meet with them 5, 6, 7 times, and it kind of just drags on, and it's more for them just to have that conversation. Because from the perspective of an investor, they never want to say no to anyone. They don't want to say yes, but they don't necessarily want to say no. So they kind of want to keep that relationship alive and keep on talking to you and keep on saying things like, great job, we like what you're doing, but they're not necessarily going to write you a check. Even if they say, we love you, you guys are amazing, and they meet with you 5 times, that's not necessarily closer to actually getting a check into the bank. So I think for your perspective in terms of not wasting all your time, because you can't spend all your time all the time fundraising, you have to figure out what are the most likely targets for the stage of the company we're in right now. And so particularly early on, that's usually going to be either an angel investor, which is like a wealthy individual or someone that kind of works in the industry, or it's going to be a seed fund, which is going to be like a smaller fund that really focuses on kind of smaller size investments. And in both of those scenarios, it really matters that you have some way of getting an introduction to that person, because sometimes you can't just submit a proposal, and certainly for things like incubators, you've probably heard of things like Y Combinator and 500 Startups and other incubators like that, and they make the process a little bit easier because they basically let you apply in the same way you apply to college to an incubator, and then once you're in an incubator, they kind of use that as a stamp of approval for you to get an audience with an investor. But if you don't have that incubator stamp of approval, you pretty much have to find a way to get an introduction to that investor. And that could be, someone that they've invested in the past, someone that's worked with them, someone that was a student of theirs, something like that. And then at that point, they can say, hey, check out so-and-so, and their startup is really cool, and they're really smart, and I really like them. And that's just much easier at that point to have a meeting where they're really going to take the time to listen to your idea and address you in that way.
There's just to add to that, that's all definitely agree, and that was definitely what we found. There's a saying that I heard sort of early on when we started fundraising, 2 sayings actually. One was, if you go in asking for advice, you're more likely to get funding. If you go in asking for money, you're more likely to get advice. So if you go in and say, hey, here's what we've got, here's what we're working on, here's what we're excited about, find someone who has done something similar before, that almost frame it as like a mentor type relationship, and chances are they'll give you good advice and you'll sort of get value out of it. But if they really like what you're doing, maybe not in that meeting, but maybe in a subsequent meeting, they might say, hey, by the way, have you thought about fundraising yet? And if, from their perspective, it's their idea to invest in you versus you asking for money from them, they're much more likely to then end up financing your company. And the second one, you guys might appreciate this, that I heard, was that fundraising, sort of that investor-founder relationship, is almost like dating in middle school. And that's to say that if you go out and imagine you're dating in middle school and go up to every potential partner and say, hey, I'm looking to date someone, do you want to date me? And you make yourself sort of available to everyone, everyone's going to be sort of put off by that. Whereas if people in your interaction with them feel like, this is a really hot deal, it's very exclusive, I'll see if I can make room for you. There's a lot of this sort of back and forth, and making it seem like sort of the investor is lucky to get in on the deal. There's a lot of sort of that kind of negotiation and trying to make it not seem like, hey, we're willing to accept cash from anyone, and will you fund us, will you fund us, will you fund us?
Yeah, it's all about creating this sense of urgency and the scarcity, and you're this rare commodity that comes along only once in a while. And there's some tricks to do that, trying to put a lot of meetings in a one compressed time period so that it seems like, oh, I have to jump from this to go to the next thing, because if you kind of string it along, sometimes it's like, all right, you met this one, and they have time to think about it, and before the next one, they have time to think about it. So. Yeah,
ideally it's like when we were doing it, the ideal is trying to get 3 or 4 meetings a day for a week or 2, and just have meeting on meeting, so that as they talk to their friends, oh yeah, we met with them, or I know, Tom and Sequoia also met with them.
Yeah.
So it feels like, okay, this is really heating up, we got to get in before it's too late. Whereas if you do 1 meeting this week, and then 2 weeks later another meeting, it's like, oh yeah, we saw them way back, and we'll wait till it's that deal is actually hot before we actually try and get in there.
I think I would say just for testing both ideas, so going out there and testing ideas with users, which I think is a really, really good idea at all stages, even when it's super early on, for getting feedback from advisors, from all that kind of stuff. All that is easier when you're in school. So you guys have plenty of time, but as a student, people are very, very receptive typically to being I'm working on this project, so maybe not even frame it as necessarily a company or something that you want to kind of raise money for, but I'm a student working on a project. That's the best possible way to open the door to someone, because most people are going to be receptive to that and say, hey, cool, I love students working on projects, so I'll give you some advice. And that can kind of be a great way to get, first of all, get the meeting, and then also just kind of set the right tone in terms of them being receptive to listening to you.
So obviously with the app running all the time, battery life and stuff would be an issue. How much of the time that you spend programming was sort of focused on optimization?
Yeah, I mean, so it definitely is one of these things where if we're going all the time and the GPS is going all the time, it will completely kill the app. So we kind of recognized that out of the gate and had basically said, we have to get it to a point where, the lower the battery drain, we start sacrificing accuracy at a certain point. So it's kind of trying to find that happy medium where accuracy is sufficiently high, but the battery drain is sufficiently low, and the two kind of have that area which meets the greatest number of users. And so a lot of time early on was definitely spent on that, especially because if you're doing stuff for iPhone or iOS, if you guys have programmed that, doing stuff in the background on that is actually pretty tricky because they don't really let you do that normally. So you have to find ways to kind of get around their guidelines and their systems to make sure that it works and is at the same time kind of complying with the stuff that they want to put out there for users. So we definitely spent a lot of time on it. I think one of the things we did was we tried to listen to our users as much as we could. So we basically would do a version that was more aggressive on the battery, more aggressive in terms of the accuracy, put it out there. We got a lot of people writing back saying way too much battery drain, this thing's killing my phone. We go back and make it a little bit less aggressive on the battery, a little bit lower on the accuracy, and kind of move our way down that chain until we got somewhere where we occasionally get someone writing in, but most of the time people don't complain. Another thing you can do too is the power of having a user setting. So sometimes you can guess what the user wants, and sometimes you can take their feedback and iterate through that process. But sometimes if you just say, all right, we can give you a low, medium, high, and then you can just see what people click on. And even if low and medium are kind of the same, you can figure out, okay, people don't care about battery because they're never switching to medium or they're never switching down to low, so we don't really need to keep on investing energy in it. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is, for us, battery is one of them. The other big thing is just scaling. It's very different building an app for 10 people that are trying and testing it versus having 100,000 people use it, especially if you're collecting a lot of data all the time. And that's one of those things where I think early on it's very tempting to build something as quickly as you possibly can, just get it out there and test. And I totally agree that for most of the time that makes sense, but at the same time you need to be a little bit aware of the foundation that you're laying for the idea that if this does take off, we need to be somewhat scalable. And there's a total balance there, because if you try to have everything super robust and super tested and super spec'd out and super scalable from the get-go, it's going to be so slow that you're never going to get anything out there. And that means that you're not going to be able to test it. And there's a pretty good chance that whatever you're building, people aren't going to like it and you're going to throw it away anyway. So you don't want to spend tons of time perfecting everything. On the other hand, if you build it really, really sloppy and it just kind of barely works for 5 people, once you get to 10,000 or 100,000, it's going to completely collapse and break under its own weight. So it's kind of trying to find that happy medium where you're obviously not building software that's going to be, changing the way the Google search algorithm works, where that's going to be tested for years and tons of people will look it over. But you're also not building something that only 2 people are going to look at. You have to kind of try to find what that balance is.
Before you guys met each other and you guys were thinking about starting your company, or at least you were, did you plan to be the only founder, or were you?
No, I think I was very intentionally looking for a co-founder. I think I very rarely have seen people who are truly solo founders who either have been successful or happy in the process of doing it. I think part of it is I think there are ups and downs to startups, and I think having the ability of having someone else there who kind of say, let's keep on doing it when you're down, and vice versa, or being able to bounce ideas off people. And I think there's so much more that comes in the richness from having an additional person there. And I think actually the delta from 1 to 2, more people the better to a certain degree, but the delta from 1 to 2 is massive and larger than 2 to 3, and certainly 3 to 4 kind of diminishes pretty quickly. So yeah, I think for me it was pretty important, and I don't think you could have done that. And certainly when it comes to fundraising and recruiting, all these other things are much easier once you are a team. You'll actually typically see a lot of incubator style programs. They'll have exceptions for solo founders, but typically they won't even kind of consider you for a solo founder.
Yeah, it's the same for me too. I mean, it's I can't think of a scenario I would have wanted to do the solo founder route. So it was very much going to Stanford and trying to see who's interested in certain things, see whose skill sets also seem to be a good balance with my own. And yeah, I mean, there are many, many times, and sort of us doing this for the last 2 years, where I think for me, if I was a solo founder, it would have been just such a low day that I would have, without another founder there, be okay, we got this. It would have been easy to throw in the towel as a solo founder.
Yeah, I mean the big thing is that you find people that have, when you have someone else, you can have a broader set of skills that you can do, and early on in a startup you kind of have to do everything, and so it's important to be able to check every single box, or as many boxes as you possibly can, and as one person that's totally impossible to do that, and 2 people it's still really hard, but it's a little bit easier.
Definitely, like as you're looking for co-founders, like it's good to have like complementary skill set, but make sure it's someone you enjoy spending time with, that you can be like locked in a room with like 16 hours a day for like 7 days a week. Because if you don't get along, it's like initially if you don't get along, like that relationship's gonna be tested a lot, and you should try and sort of figure that out, suss that out early on, because the last thing you want is to be working with someone who you don't like, and then 6 months down the road, both of you are just super mad at each other. So
Yeah.
find someone to get along with, and who also has that sort of complementary skill set, and whose company you enjoy.
Yeah, I feel like most of the startups that I see that kind of fail really early on, it's typically going to be from like co-founder issues. It's like not even like the product, because the product changes and the technology changes and all that stuff happens, but like the blow-ups I see early on are people just suddenly are going in different directions or can't talk or something weird is going on, and that's the kind of thing that you want to figure that out early rather than later, but the more you can do kind of in the upfront to figure that out, the better.
Could you talk a little bit about your early process? Like you found each other and had this idea of what your problem was, and so how you went from there.
Yeah. So we both wanted to start companies. We had very different ideas, which in retrospect, I think neither of them were like great ideas. My idea was this idea, Foursquare was popular at the time. Do you guys know Foursquare? You like check in places you go. There were a lot of apps, there were like 5 or 6 apps all doing this. And I had this problem of like friends would be on all these different apps. So I was trying to figure out where different people were, and so basically aggregating all this like check-in information in one place. And I realized like outside of San Francisco, like not many people were really using any of these check-in apps. So I told Dylan this idea. I was like, yeah, it's like sort of interesting, but he'd been in New York, and like that's not a behavior his friends engage in. So I was like, okay, but maybe there is something here between like the digital and physical world. So took it a level up, and then Dylan's idea was.
Yeah, I was like trying to do basically like real world like tagging with things. The idea was like you would have objects, you'd be able to have like a digital entity for the physical object, and doing things like QR code stickers or basically ways of creating online replicas of all these things. So you'd be able to like store little moments in each of these places that you went to.
Yeah. So I think the good test we had early on was like, what sort of stuff are we interested in? Can we have a conversation where it's like, I might have been thinking of my idea for like 3 months, or Dylan might have been thinking of his idea for 3 months. Like, can you have a constructive conversation where you can sort of poke holes, like what do we like about that idea, what don't we like about it, what can we take out, what's compelling, what's interesting for us, what problems it's trying to solve, and sort of being good at going back to the drawing board together and then addressing those problems directly and not getting hung up on stuff we previously thought of.
And then once we had the idea, a large part of it was just testing it out. So I mean, the big thing was like, once we had a general sense of like, all right, we want to be like the mint.com for your time, which is like, we want to be like this personal tracker for how you spend your time. We went and just did a bunch of interviews with random strangers on Stanford's campus. So we like had a little notebook, went out and just talked to people that were different ages, different demographics, and we're like, really trying not to ask leading questions, because if you go to someone like, if I give you an amazing app that tells you everything about your time and like spits it back to you right away, do you want this? They're like, yeah. Like guaranteed, like that's gonna happen. But if you go in and you're like, tell me about how you think about your time, or like, what are the biggest problems you have to how you spend your time? Like, how do you juggle all the different responsibilities you have during the course of a week? And kind of just like let them naturally come to that conclusion. So starting there, very general questions. Next step was kind of rough wireframes, so literally just drawing things out, pen and paper, and then going back and starting at high level and then kind of walking them through and trying to get a sense of how people interact with it. Then next step was like a barely functioning prototype that we like sent out to friends and family, and then from there kind of just started expanding it slowly from that. And I think that really like the idea of getting feedback from as many people as you possibly can just makes total sense, because like there's no way that you're going to be able to figure out what people want exactly. Like you're just not. Like you can guess pretty well, and like some people are better at guessing than others, but like guaranteed you're going to do better if you sit down and you talk to people. And they may not tell you exactly what they want, but they can tell you things they don't want, or they can give you suggestions and criteria that you might say, okay, this bounds what I'm interested in. And the earlier you can do it, the more rework you can save. And it's kind of intimidating and weird to go up to someone and